This is Tao Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Ido Aharoni, Tel Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.
Welcome to Tao Unbound. I'm Ido Aharoni, your host. It's a pleasure to host in our studio today Dr. Blass from the Porter School for Environmental Studies and Earth Science.
Yes, thank you.
Formerly with the Kohler School of Management until 2019. And I'd like to welcome you to our podcast. I know that what you have to say is of great interest to our audience. Many people are concerned with the environment. Obviously, you're also combining the management aspect of it, which is hugely important. But before all of that, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what made you decide about this particular direction.
So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. I'm originally from Ra'anana. I grew in Israel all of my childhood. My undergrad is from the Technion in industrial engineering. And as I was already almost ready to finish my degree, I realized I wanted to combine environmental aspects into my industrial interest. I went and looked for what's available. Say, what's the connection between industry and the environment you want? Become an environmental engineer. If not, continue with your industrial engineering work, but don't combine them.
So this was before it became fashionable.
Exactly. That was the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
And I realized very quickly that I don't really have any opportunities, academic opportunities here in Israel, unfortunately. And I moved to the US for a few years. I've started as an industrial engineer in an environmental laboratory in California. And later on, when I wanted to go back to graduate school, I found this discipline of industrial ecology. And basically what I was envisioning, I saw that there is a young discipline called this way. And therefore I applied for my master's and later PhD in the Brand School in UC Santa Barbara. It's a special graduate school for environmental studies. And I came back to Israel at the end of 2009.
Well, I happen to know the campus of UCSB. It's one of the most beautiful campuses in the world. It's on the water.
Can't complain, you know. When I moved back, everyone told me, "Are you crazy?" It's like, listen, beside the dolphins, it's almost the same.
Yeah, and the students there are, they really enjoy the close proximity to the water. There's a lot of surfing going on, and it's just a fun campus. And it's also a very vibrant Jewish community there, which I got to know during the years I served out of our office in Los Angeles, which is, I think, a little bit before you came to Santa Barbara. So you spent, all in all, how many years in the United States?
Almost 8 years.
8 years. Yeah. That's a significant period of time.
5 years out of it in UC.
Would you say that when you came back, obviously, in terms of the public awareness to environmental issues, California was way ahead of Israel.
Of course.
And so how describe the transition back to Israel in terms of of where people put the environment in terms of a priority?
Yeah, so I moved back with this vision to bring the concept of industrial ecology, life cycle thinking, resource efficiency back to Israel. When I've started discussions with different professionals, there's like, who is this crazy lady? What is she talking about? But very quickly after Israel joined the OECD. And when Israel joined the OECD and the gap analysis that was done suggested that 40% of the gaps are related to the environment. And very quickly, policymakers and other organizations started to understand the missing lingo. And I was, I think, in the right place and the right time to bring back all of that knowledge, which was my vision when I decided to come back to Israel. Everybody asked me, "Are you crazy?"
So for the benefit of our listeners and viewers that do not know what OECD is, we'll just say that it's the elite club of world economies, maybe 37 members, and Israel was admitted into the OECD in 2010. Same year, we were admitted into Eureka, which was also a very important European Union research program, and CERN, CERN,
Right.
which is the particle accelerator. So 2010 was a good year for environmental awareness in Israel. Wouldn't you say that?
Yes, I would say there was environmental awareness already, but in respective to policy and business and how we make that together, and also how we look at consumption and production systems, that's where we were quite behind. For example, on water technologies, on solar technologies, we are leading from the 60s, right? So on waste management, we are 20 years behind. So it's really topic specific.
So, but let's talk about the principle, the concept that you brought with you from California. What would you say was the main challenge when you had to introduce this kind of thinking here in Israel?
So the concept is basically suggesting that we need to take a holistic approach, and we need to take a look at the full life cycle of anything we try to assess. If it's new products, if it's services, if it's new technologies, we need to look all the way from the raw material extraction to the end when I'm done using it and I want to throw it, landfill it, recycle it, whatever. Now, for a small country like Israel, very, very poor in natural resources that bring a lot already, like by importing products, and we barely have any raw materials, and also with a very limited waste management and recycling industry because we are very small and many times it's not economical. Adapting this life cycle perspective is sometimes hard because many of those stages do not take place in our country. And then you can start asking, as me as a policymaker or as a business manager, do I really need to take care of this entire chain, or should I only be responsible for what happens in my little backyard and in my operations? And that's the first contradiction and first trade-off that you might need to make when you adopt such a system perspective.
And I would assume that obviously, Israel is a small country, and by definition, our ecological footprint is not significant on a global scale. However, Israel could become a major factor in coming up with solutions to environmental problems. Where would you say are the main areas of concentration the Israeli system should focus on going forward?
So first, we know we are the startup nation, right? We have a lot of good minds. So the first thing is really to make them change their path, or instead of dealing with, high-tech and gambling or other things like that, let's focus on green IT, green technologies, but not only to bring them to other countries, first concentrate on adopting them here. Okay, and that's, for example, with the solar, it's a very good example. I always go back to that. The solar energy, right? From the 60s, we have very good R&D, but how much is implemented in Israel at the moment? Less than 10% is renewables, and mainly solar.
How do you explain that?
So what is this?
How do you explain that? It really baffles me. How do you explain that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a few things. So we have great science. We also want to make great R&D. We want to duplicate it and scale it up and have it as a major economic sector. But when it comes to implementation, there is a lot of barriers. From different perspectives, cultural, legal, the differences between the municipal versus the national levels and the authorities. And of course, the economics is, now it's here, but in the past it was more expensive. So you needed to really have vision in order to push it. And altogether, it was easier to push it abroad than here, with some countries like Spain bringing big subsidies or things like that. So that's part of the dissonance of putting it here first versus just selling it out there. But it's something that we can change. With water technologies, is the opposite. We didn't have water. We needed to come up with solutions. As a relative of Simcha Blass, who invented the Movil Artzi and the drip irrigation,
the national carrier of water.
Yeah,
so tell us about Simcha Blass and your connection to him.
So he was a nephew of my grandfather. When I was a little kid, in primary school and later on in mid school, we always needed to do some type of family-related assessment or assignments than I would do on the water system in Israel. We always have a corner in my heart for that. And many years after, when I came to Mekorot, I saw a picture of Simcha Blass on the wall, and I was like, wow, this is closing the loop.
I just received a few months ago, someone in the United States was looking for an old book that was written about him. Did you know that?
I think probably Meimeriva Vemas.
Yes, that's the book.
That's the book I was growing on. That was in our family root tree. And
now I'm sure you know the fascination of Ben Gurion with the Tennessee Valley Authority, with TVA. And are you familiar with that? So David Ben Gurion was very fascinated by the carrier system along the Mississippi.
Yeah.
And so he brought to Israel the book TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the story of how they were able to develop a water management system. And that was an inspiration to many people that later became involved in Mekorot and the Movil Artzi and the national carrier and so on.
So Simcha was also the first water commissioner in Israel. As part of that work, he was planning and developing the national carrier, which is still up and running, many on the original parts and
so
design.
I'm sure he accompanied then Ben Gurion in his famous visit to TVA back in the early 1950s. We should look into that in the archives. But to go back to your current work, and that's a very important family connection. Water desalination proves your point, because if I remember correctly, in the beginning, the economists said, this is not economic. Let's not do it. It's too expensive. But then, obviously, when the solution was up and running, and the market basically adapted to the fact that today Israel is independent in water production. Question is, can we duplicate that success in the area of renewable energy?
So that's a very interesting question. With water, we had no choice, right? We were drying up. We didn't have enough water. We cannot rely on climate anymore. We needed the water. We developed the technologies. Regardless of the prices, we needed the water. Okay, so we needed to implement it first year. With energy prices in Israel are still quite low. If you look at the European market and other areas, we are still quite low energy prices. So it's not a necessity, right? So maybe some people think we can keep going on the natural gas and the coal, but it's a matter of actually pricing right the resources, and also when time comes and prices go up and those technologies become more cheaper and relevant.
Now let me ask you a question, because many of the people that listen to us and watch us are friends of the university, and they're donors, and they're many of them are in business. Try to articulate, for the benefit of people in finance and in insurance, why it's important for them to care about the things that you're doing.
So let me first connect the water with the energy, okay? Because in Israel, the energy sector and the water sector are well connected, because desalination requires a lot of energy, right? So we have desalination, great, we have water, but it comes with an energy price and greenhouse gas emission and air pollution and other prices that we still have with the energy system. So taking an holistic approach, understanding the nexus between water and energy in regions like Israel is critical. We did a study about life cycle analysis of the entire drinking water system in Israel, taking into account the large demand for energy by the desalination plants, and quantified how many greenhouse gas emissions in the terms of CO2 equivalent we need for every glass of water, every cubic meter of water that we actually drink here. Now take it another step up and say, okay, and what is the financial risk here? What happens if climate change risks are really high, and they are high in our area? You mentioned before that we are a very little country with little footprint, but from the climate perspective, we're going to suffer much more than other areas. I think there is a recent report by the IPPC that suggested that our area is in 8 times more risk for climate risk compared to other places.
Because we are technically a desert.
Yeah, desert, but also with the Mediterranean Sea and all of that, and the small climatic types of mini climate that we have.
So we'll get to climate
and that's where
risk.
the financial risk, that's where the financial people are getting into, suddenly into the picture, because insurance companies, they're now starting to assess risk.
And not only that, if you're a CEO of a major bank, you should be concerned.
Of course.
Unfortunately, I don't see that they're being concerned right now. I don't think
they are concerned. I must say that less in Israel, more abroad. But even in Israel now, in our school, we've started a few years ago the Eco Arena, which was a platform for the big industries in Israel, NGOs and academia to discuss and do things related to the environment. We recently started a finance arena, exactly the same, more about climate risk and what the finance sector should do in Israel in order to push for that. And we are even now starting an high-tech arena. So all of the sectors are concerned. It catch its sector in different places, but definitely Israel is a bit behind still there compared to.
So you mentioned your school. I should say that I'm familiar with your school because of my relationship with Shirley Porter and with her daughter Linda Streit and with her granddaughter Joanna Landau, who introduced me many years ago to Pinchas Alpert and Aryeh Nesher, and later on I met Colin. So I'm familiar. And then, of course, thanks to a massive donation from the Porter family, you established a new facility, a new building, and now it's called the Porter School. And so tell us about, first of all, the structure of the school and your particular work within the school.
So the school is today situated under the Exact Sciences faculty, and it has 3 different departments. Our department, the Environmental Studies, Geography, and the Geosciences. It's a very multidisciplinary team with researchers from different disciplines, social aspects, hardcore engineering, health, public health, and ethics. So we are really diverse, and that's what we try to push in our program. So when we prepare the next generations of students to tackle those sustainability problems and to be in strategic positions, if it's in industry, if it's with NGOs, if it's in the government and municipalities, we train them to take an holistic interdisciplinary approach to any sustainability problem, understanding that they must have this interdisciplinary background because today's challenges requires multiple professions, multiple teams, and when you know to talk the language of the different professions, it's critical for the success. We also employ what we call project-based learning courses when students are actually engaged in real projects with real clients, working on real problems and challenges, also bring them, another step forward, being ready for what they will do once they graduate.
Now, in terms of the collaboration with other schools, can you mention some other schools that you're working with? You mentioned the interdisciplinary holistic approach. What other schools? I'm assuming engineering is a big part.
Within Tel Aviv University, we work with almost every school. I personally work with engineering. So, for example, Professor Adas Maman, we have joint projects. She's coming up with new technologies, and we are assessing the environmental and sustainability.
So, give us an example of such a technology.
So, for example, we work on new wastewater treatment technologies that are more efficient on energy. So they require less energy and therefore less polluting later on when you convert it to the greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants, while providing a better water, right? So it goes on both ends, improving the technology, the purification itself and the water quality while reducing energy demand for that. So this is a joint project with a German team funded by the Ministry of Innovation and Science, a special program that they have with Germans. And here, on one end, we do the development in the lab. That's what the DAS team is doing, developing the new coating for the membranes and very specific new technologies, while we do the assessment, the environmental assessment, taking life cycle thinking approach. So it's a small, early, what we call the emerging technologies, still in very early TRL. But what will happen once it scale up and it's reach high TRL 8, 9, how it would look like, how would it compare to other purification technologies that are existing in the market today, trying to understand what is the best conditions to employ such technology, under what parameters and under what conditions.
Now, we have an opportunity to talk to someone like yourself who really dedicated her life to not only the study of the environment, but also to come up with solutions. So you're working actively to improve everybody's life, and that's admirable. I would like to, as a former government employee, I'd like to ask you a question about where do you see the role of government? Because I have not been with the Israeli government for over 6 years now, but my friends in the government that just came back from the most recent climate summit came pretty discouraged because of the realization that governments, by and large, and the Israeli government is no exception, don't have the executional capacity to solve the problems. Do you feel the same? And if not, tell us why.
So I think that governments, sometimes they don't have enough of the professional knowledge or the best, newest knowledge. But I think their role now is in facilitating and helping new things to happen, and then they can go away.
As the regulator.
Right. So it's either by regulation, also supporting high-risk, high-risk ideas that maybe, funders and seed money will not go there. And you said, okay, I put the money. Or, of course, to start these new research centers that do not exist in Israel and no one will put money for. So, for example, very recently, in a combination of efforts by here in Tel Aviv University with the Social Sciences Faculty, with Professor Itai Sened, and with the Ministry of Innovation and Science, we won a proposal for starting a new applied system analysis center here in Israel that will be a national center that will be situated in Tel Aviv University and will serve government, academia, and industry in collaboration with YASA, which is a highly recognized sustainability and resiliency research organization in Austria. And the ministry had an important part of it in putting the first seed funding for such research center. This discipline in Israel is almost does not exist. We want to educate the new generation of researchers, and we don't have enough expertise there. So this is things that, we are doing very few researchers so far in Israel, and now we want to take it and upscale it. Of course, in providing seed money for new technologies, putting procedures and standards, making sure that Israel is in the first line with all other developed countries on how we evaluate, how we measure, how we put goals, how we measure if we got there. It's not enough to put the goals. You need to make sure that you get there and then also renew them all the time and make a continuous improvement. So there are many roles the government should take. Unfortunately, with the instability in the political situation, sometimes we don't see it happen because every time there is a new minister, everything starts from the beginning. But I think the professional level at the ministries are there to support such transitions, and they educate themselves also to do so.
And by the way, I must say that, all Israelis should be proud of the fact that the Israeli governments of the past 4 or 5 decades proactively invested in technologies in the field of the environment. I know that there was a special effort in renewable technology under the Prime Minister's office that started some 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And so I think Israel is doing well. But the crisis of executional capacities is global. It's not just uniquely Israeli. And we could see it during the pandemic and obviously. Do you think the world can meet the goals that they set for themselves? Is there any reason for us to be optimistic?
So, the UN came with the Sustainable Development Goals, and many countries submitted so-called their status report and progress report, and Israel is part of it, just submitted the second report. And we are still far from reaching those, but I think first setting those priorities and goals is the first step, because when you have something on the agenda and it's set and it's written, it's already starting the process, okay? I'm not sure we'll meet those goals, okay? And I think it's a dynamic thing. But for sure, we need more governments involved pushing forward this approach. And also, while we try to measure and make sure we improve, I think governments are not doing enough on adaptation strategies, right? So everyone is now measuring greenhouse gas emissions and resource efficiency and ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. It's good, it's important. We asked for it for the last 20 years, and finally we're doing it, but it's not enough, especially for countries like us that's going to suffer a lot. We must have a strategic adaptation plan. And the government is not there, the businesses are not there. We just participated 2 weeks ago in a regional conference in the East Negev area, which is it's a extreme weather condition area that a lot of the world will need to learn from in the future. And when we ask industry in a panel, what are you doing for adaptation? What is your adaptation strategies? You will not have water, you will have a breakout in supplies, less agriculture produce. What are you going to do? How do you prepare yourself?
Right. But that requires...
Not there yet. And this requires a governmental ad hoc, non-stop shop, one-stop shop, how you call it, to tackle this and plan it today. You cannot wait with that.
Well, we have, I think it's one of the things that is making us unique is that we're very good improvising, coming up with solutions. We're not very good when we are required
long-term planning
to implement long-term strategy. And it's not a coincidence, by the way, that when you look at the top 100 brands in the world, about 80 or 75 of them are American brands. There's not even one Israeli brand in the top 100 brands, but there are 3 or 4 Swedish brands. And I always ask my students, why do you think Sweden, which is more or less the same population size as Israel, maybe a little bit more, why Sweden can have 3 or 4 brands in the top 100 in the world and Israel doesn't? And it's a very interesting question. It's a philosophical discussion. But let me ask you this because our time is running. What do you think needs to happen that is not happening? In addition, you said, okay, we have a problem with the adaptation, the implementation of all those plans or drawing the right conclusions from all the analysis, right? What else needs to happen in order to, better prepare, better position Israel to deal with the crisis? It's definitely inevitably coming.
Yeah, so it's a complex question. I will divide it to a few parts. So the first one is, of course, start to adapt, not even long-term, mid-term, right, planning. And this you can only do in collaboration with academia, looking at those models and those simulations and try to understand consequences and scenarios and deal with the results and start planning according to them. And that's what we're going to do in this new center that I just mentioned. It's actually going to serve policymakers in that direction. Specifically for the Israeli economy, I say a few things for a long time. We first need to do strategic materials assessment. What is critical for the economy in Israel in the coming years? Which materials we are relying on? We have nothing in-house. We bring everything from abroad. We need to understand quantities, where are we going, and how are we going to secure those materials. Okay? Then those materials come with an environmental package, right? So you need to think how we don't lose twice. We bring them, now let's keep them in the economy. So when we finish to use products, not to throw it again as waste outside because we don't have enough recycling industry going on here. How do we make them stay in the economy? Now it comes to innovation in small-scale recycling technologies because recycling is usually only economic when you do it large scale, but we want to keep the materials inside. So now the Abrams agreement might become very relevant when you want to open up to some type of region collaboration, especially when it comes to energy and waste management. Right? So you see where it's going. We cannot have a copy-paste from other countries. We're a very unique country in our location, in our size, but also in our innovative approach. And we need to use all of that startup nation now in the sustainability path. I
saw somewhere, just to strengthen your point, the point you just made, that the electrical vehicle sector has grown rapidly the last 2 years, and now 13% of the total number of cars in Israel are electrical cars, which brings the question of what's going to happen with the batteries. One day, someone will have to find a solution, how to recycle them, how to revive them, whatever the solution may be. Well, this was a thought-provoking discussion.
That's another full discussion. A lot of my research is around electric vehicles and the consequences of that. So that's very important. And that's, again, the nexus between transport and the energy, right? We talked before on weather and energy.
So, Dr. Blass, it's a date. You're invited again to this podcast to have a discussion about electric vehicles. And I really would like to thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
You educated us, and it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers and listeners back home, greetings from Tel Aviv. Until the next episode, bye-bye.
Bye.